Good evening, Sukihotu. Welcome to today's Q&A forum. This is the number 7 in the series. We missed 2 weeks, so we're going to continue. Today, we're going to do something very interesting. I received several questions from 2 devotees from overseas. So today, I'm going to deal with one of them first. A few questions related to Bhante Punnaji's teachings. This is why today we're dedicated to take a relook at the legacy of Bhante Punnaji's lessons, covering the original teachings of the Buddha. So without further ado, I'll just open up the screen. Now, you can see this link. Please, you can download the PowerPoint slides from this link so that you can follow our sharing slide by slide if you want to, right? So, okay, so today is the 3rd of May, 2021. This is the 7th in the series of question and answer forum. Now, I received several questions, quite a lot of questions from the same devotee. I just shortened a lot of them. So this is really quite a handful of questions from a devotee from overseas who has been following Bhante Punnaji's videos and also my videos. And she has quite a few questions. So mainly dealing with the things that Bhante Punnaji especially emphasized on, which is not quite what other people interpret or explain in the original teachings of the Buddha. So these are special emphasis of Bhante Punnaji. So I have basically relooked at this as well as another set of questions from another devotee from overseas. So I've put them together and basically devoted to sharing the legacy of what Bhante Punnaji has taught us. There are 4 major areas that are quite commonly taught by Bhante, and it helps us all to understand much better the original teachings of the Buddha. The first is Bhante has always taught us that if you really want to understand the Dharma, if you really want to follow what the Buddha was trying to teach, you must examine it with an experiential mindset, meaning you have to think in terms of experiences and not think in terms of existence. So basically, we're going to talk about experiential versus existential thinking. Right? So that is the first question I'm going to deal with. The second one is the person asked a number of things about Mano and Citta, where Bhante pointed out that Mano is referring to this cognitive process of mind, and Citta is pointing out or referring to this affective process of mind. The cognitive process of mind, generally, we refer to it as our thinking, our rational thinking, cognition, and conception. Whereas the affective process of mind, generally, we refer to it as our emotions, mood, and temperament. So that is the second question. And Bhante actually explains all this very frequently because these are very crucial in understanding the original teachings of the Buddha. The third one is about introspection. What is introspection and how to apply introspective awareness? Now, there won't be enough time to cover all this today, so I'm only covering the first 2. The third one and the last one will be covered in the next session. So that could be next Monday, the 10th of May. And the fourth question is how to simply relax and introspect, because this person is aware that we do a lot of introspection. So what is it compared to what people talk about in terms of concentration, right, and awareness and so on. So the important thing is that we got to learn firstly how to relax and introspect and not concentrate, because concentration is exerting a lot of energy and it tires your mind and your body. And this is the way to gain freedom from suffering. as what Bhante has been guiding us all along. So I will deal with number 3 and number 4 next session. So let's get started with number 1. So I have, by the way, I have numbered the questions according to our series of Q&A forums so that we don't have 2 questions with the same number. So that first question now is question number 18. Simply put, what is experiential mindset versus existential thinking? So in other words, what is the difference, and why is it that we need to apply experiential mindset when we examine the Dharma and when we examine the teachings of the Buddha? So let's begin with a explanation from Bhante. What really is this existential thinking that we're talking about?
In that Sabbasava Sutra, the Buddha points out that the normal person thinks, did I exist in the past? How did I exist in the past? In what way did I exist in the past? Will I be existing in the future? In what form will I exist in the future? Do I exist now? In what form do I exist now? In other words, the normal person is thinking in terms of the past, present and future. And that way of thinking confirms the idea, I exist. And if you hold on to that idea, I exist, you'll never be able to gain freedom from suffering. To exist is to think in terms of an existence of a subject and an object. We are all the time thinking in terms of a subject and an object. When we go to learn the English language, we learn the subject, the object and the verb. The subject, the object and the verb. That is the normal way of thinking. That normal way of thinking, if continued, you cannot bring suffering to an end. That's what it means. Normally we think I come first and you or the object comes and I see you or the object. So that means the subject and the object comes first, then the subject and object meets and the subject sees the object. That is how people think. But that is not what it is.
So Bhante mentioned about subject and object. So let's take a look at what he was pointing out. First of all, existential thinking means we think about the past. So did I exist in the past? What was I in the past and how was I in the past? So we think about the past and we think about the future. Will I exist in the future? What will I be in the future? These are very well explained in the sutra, the Sabbasava Sutra, right? Talking about defilements, talking about pains, polluting the mind, so that it makes us think in a very existential way about the past, about the future. So the first aspect of existential thinking is that we think in terms of time. There is a past, there is a future, there is a present. Even the present, we are really experiencing moment to moment. The present itself is not even existing. So we think about the past that exists, we think about a future that we can create to exist, and we think about the present that is existing. And the second aspect of existential thinking is thinking there is I, me, or mine. There is this subject in me. We call this the subjective self. So we think in terms of I am the subject. And then you out there, you are the object. So there are objects out there and there is a subject in here. That's how we think in existential terms. So this is a spatial thinking. That means that there is a space, there is an object, a physical object existing inside, out there and in me, right? And this is why somehow the mind connects that as I exist. So there is this physical self we think we exist, right? And of course, when we interact with anything, we think of it in terms of the subjective self in me is interacting with the objective self out there. So when we see, hear, smell, taste, or touch anything, we always say, oh, I like this. So there is an I and there is a this, right? So let's take a look at this more closely, how it is happening. So the best one to use is the experience of seeing. So with the experience of seeing, experience arises dependent on the presence of necessary conditions. So we use the example of seeing a dog. So there is this dog. So we're looking at the dog. So in order to be able to see the dog, certain conditions must be present. For example, light. If there is no light, we can't see anything. It's pitch dark. So certain conditions are necessary. Light reflected from the dog enters our sense organ, the eyeball, and stimulate our sense organ. So light entering the eyes stimulate the retina, the back of the eyeball, and that is our sense organ. When sense organ is stimulated, it sends impulses and signals to the brain. And if we happen to be paying attention, then we become aware of looking at the dog, right? Because if you're not paying attention, even though your face is facing the dog, you might not notice the dog. So if you're paying attention to the dog, then you become aware. And this awareness is because of the process of perception. So there's a mental image that arises in our mind. Oh, there is this mental image of that dog out there. In reality, in this experience, this mental image arising is the rupa in your mind. And again, I want to point out this important point, the word rupa. Very frequently, you hear people say rupa is about materiality, material, the object out there. That is not correct. The term rupa really means image or appearance. And appearance is not a physical appearance. Appearance is a mental appearance in the mind, appearance of this mental image in the mind. So this mental image arises in the mind when all these conditions are present. There is a dog out there, we're faced towards the dog, the eyes are working, there's light, and it stimulates, and we are paying attention, and then we become aware there is a dog out there. So basically, when the mind is aware there is a dog out there, we have the perception of seeing the dog. And then the mind begins to project. Projecting this concept. This is the concept. It's not the real thing. It's the concept created in the mind. Concept of an object out there, identified as a dog. And the word dog is really the identity we assign to what we have perceived. So that word dog is nama, giving it a name, a label to identify what it is. And when we think of it as out there, we think of it as the world out there. So now there is an experience. So this is really just the experience. We have experienced seeing. But the mind projects that, I see the dog out there. So first, it creates this notion, I see a dog out there. And because of that, what it does is it dichotomizes that experience. Dichotomize or dichotomy means breaking it into two parts. And what are the two parts? So the mind thinks, there is an object out there. And that's the world out there. And that's why it's called loka. That is the objective experience. The object is out there. But if there is an object out there, then there must be something in here. And so the dog is out there. And this something in here is the subjective experience. Experiencing this, this atta in here, the I, the self is experiencing this, the subjective experience. So therefore, I see. So when we experience seeing, we don't think of it as seeing. We think of it as, I see the dog out there. So I see a dog out there. That's how we think of it. We don't think of it as seeing. There is the experience of seeing and the mental image arising, that the perception of a dog. Now, if you think in terms of there is seeing and mental image arises with the perception of a dog, or what we call a dog, then that is experiential thinking. But we don't think like that. We think in existential terms. We always break it. There is this object out there and there is this subject in here. So that's the dichotomy of experience. So that is really what Bhante was referring to in the early part of the video, that we have the subject and the object. Right? Now let's listen to Bhante explain further about what is this experiential mindset then, right? So that we are able to understand better what's the difference.
The Buddha points out the Arya Savaka, the disciple of the Buddha, doesn't think in that way. He's only thinking, what is suffering? What is the cause of suffering? What is the ending of suffering? And what is the way to end suffering? If he begins to think in that way, that person's suffering will come to an end. Why is this? This is something very important to understand. What this means is that karma and rebirth is a fact that the Buddha has seen through his own experience. Yet, if you keep on thinking in terms of karma and rebirth, you cannot gain freedom from suffering. So to get out of that way of thinking, is to think in what is called the experiential way of thinking. Now, what is that? The experiential way is to see that what we see or hear or smell or taste or touch is an experience. Seeing is an experience. Hearing is an experience. The seeing comes first, and it is in the seeing that the subject is created and the object is created. It is in the process of seeing that I come into being. And the object comes into being. When that is properly understood, then the idea of existence disappears. It is only when that idea of existence disappears, you are free not only of existence, you are also free of what is called death. If you don't exist, how can you die? That is awakening from the dream of existence. This is why the Buddha is called Buddha. Buddha means one who has awakened from the dream of existence.
Bhante was saying that in the process of seeing, there is only the seeing. Seeing comes first. But when we experience seeing, we break it into two parts, right? And the other thing that Bhante pointed out is the experiential mindset is always aware of the Four Noble Truths, that there is dukkha, and there are reasons why dukkha arises, or there is a cause to dukkha, and that dukkha can be brought to an end, and there's a way leading to the ending of dukkha. So if we examine our experience from that perspective, we will always be aware how that an experience affects us, how an experience brings about suffering, pain, anguish, anxiety, and so on. So what is really going on is that in this karma bhava that we are in, that means we are in this realm that we call the sensual realm. The reason it is called karma bhava is that word karma here is referring to the sensuality, sensory experience. That means beings in this realm have sensory organs to be able to experience the environment. And what is really going on is that we are organisms in an environment. And first of all, the body is undergoing a process called metabolism. Metabolism keeps the body alive. When metabolism stops, the body is dead. When the person is alive, there is an activity going on in the body called the metabolism. And at the same time, human beings are endowed with 5 physical senses, and that enables us to experience the environment through these sensory perceptions. what is picked up by the sense organs are sensory perceptions. So we experience the environment through our sense organs, and that leads to awareness of the environment, commonly called consciousness. So we are able to see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. And then we also have a sixth sense, which is the ability to cognize, the ability to think, right? And all this is because of the five aggregates, panchakanda. So what is really going on is in this body, it is constantly experiencing panchakanda, constantly, moment to moment. What is really happening is the experience of panchakanda. And then this experience of panchakanda becomes interpreted as, oh, consciousness. And with existential thinking, we begin to think I exist. So this is really what's happening with us. Right? So the mind actually creates the notion that I exist. But in reality, all that is going on is just panchakanda constantly, perpetually happening, moment to moment. That's all there is. And Bhante was mentioning, first I want to remind you of what Bhante earlier said about experiential thinking. If we think in terms of karma and rebirth, we will never be free from suffering. The reason is that even though the Buddha mentioned karma and rebirth, he was not really emphasizing teaching karma and rebirth. Karma and rebirth has been around long, long before the Buddha came along, before all the Buddhas came along. So it has been around a long, it has always been there. Right? So beings are being reborn into samsaric world and so on. Right? That has always been there. And whatever we do, we are accumulating karma. And these karma that we accumulate will ripen from time to time. It can ripen immediately. It can ripen later on. It can ripen sometime later. It can ripen at the end of our life. It can also be carried on to future rebirths and ripen in a future life. So this is perpetually happening. So this has always been around. Karma and rebirth is really not the essence of what the Buddha was trying to teach us. Of course, what is important is to be aware there is karma and rebirth. To be aware that whatever we do creates karma. We do good, we are creating good karma. We do something evil, we are creating bad karma. Right? So that is the thing about that. And Bhante mentioned also that if we constantly think in terms of karma and rebirth, what is happening is that the mind is locked on to existence. Now, if the mind is locked on to existence, then we are continuously being reborn into existence. So in order to free ourselves from existence, we have to abandon this existential thinking and don't lock our mind onto this karma and rebirth. Just realize that there is karma, there is rebirth for beings that are not enlightened, and that when we do good, we are creating good karma. When we do evil, we are creating bad karma. Just be aware of that and have that at the back of your mind. But don't treat that as the central theme of Buddhism. The central theme of Buddhism is what you see on the screen here. Chattari Ariya Satchani, the fourfold supernormal realities, where the Buddha said, first, there is dukkha. And Bhante calls this the insecurity of life. And this has to be understood. So we got to understand that there is dukkha, and we have to learn that. And this is really all part of what we call right view. If we don't understand that, then we are not having right view. So firstly, understand that there is dukkha. Secondly, understand samudaya, that is the origin of dukkha, or the causes of dukkha. That the origin of this insecurity leads to the dream of existence. Bhante Punnaji always likes to use this term. The dream of existence is really us being tied down in samsaric world, thinking that we exist, so we continue to be reborn time after time in this samsaric world. right? That has to be abandoned. We have to learn how to let go these origin of this dukkha, the causes of dukkha. We're going to learn how to abandon them, to be abandoned. Of course, the good news is that all can be brought to an end, nirodha, the cessation. So dukkha can be brought to an end, cessation of this insecurity of life by awakening from the dream of existence. This has to be realized. Having understood, having abandoned, then it can be realized. And then, of course, the Buddha that taught us magga, the way leading to the awakening, and this is the supernormal Eightfold Way. This is the way that leads us to abandon the notion of existence, so that we can become free from existence, free from all suffering. And this has to be cultivated. That means the Eightfold Way is the cultivation. People ask, what is the doctrine of Buddhism? What is the practice of Buddhism? Well, you see it all on the screen. The Four Noble Truths, or what Bhante calls the Fourfold Supernormal Realities, that's the doctrine of Buddhism. That is the doctrine that the Buddha expounded in all the time that he was teaching, and that's really what he was expounding, that the Four Noble Truths. And what is the practice of Buddhism? That is the Eightfold Way, the magga, the way leading to the awakening. And that leads to the complete cessation of all suffering. Okay, so let's take a look at the Four Noble Truths one by one in a moment. So that was the last question that we dealt with. Now let's take a look at the next question. The next question: what is the significance of Mano, which we call cognitive process, and chitta, which we call affective process? Okay, so in order to understand this, we have to take a look at what the Buddha said about the mind, right? So first, let's listen to what Bhante's explanation about thinking versus emotions, right?
When we speak about the mind, we really have two minds. Most people don't know that. One mind is the thinking mind. The other mind is the emotional mind. Now the thinking mind can think, but it is the emotional mind that wants things or hates things or fears things or worries about things. That is the emotional mind. Now when you come to the temple and say take up the 5 precepts, it is the thinking mind that is doing that. But you go home and maybe you quarrel with your husband or wife or whoever, or maybe neighbors, or why is that? That is done by the emotional mind, not the thinking mind. And so, even if we understand, when you read the book, you understand everything, your understanding is done by the thinking mind. But you cannot live according to your understanding because the emotional mind goes in the opposite direction. Today, the thinking mind in the modern world is much more advanced than the primitive world. That is why we have electric lights, we have fans, we have air conditioning, we have motor vehicles to go about, we have airplanes even to fly to other countries. Now people have even gone to the moon, and now they are trying to go even beyond the moon. We have this wonderful thing called a computer. All this is because of the thinking mind. It is the thinking mind that has done all these things, wonderful things. But still, are we free from crime? Are we free from wars? Are we free from terrorism, injustice? Why all these things? Because the emotional mind is dominating the world today. The thinking mind is only a slave of the emotional mind. This is why the thinking mind has created the nuclear weapons that can even destroy the world. Because everything that the thinking mind has done is what the emotional mind wants. So this is why the Buddha pointed out that what we need is to start working according to the thinking mind and not the emotional mind. That the thinking mind should dominate the world, not the emotional mind. The emotional mind has to learn to control. The thinking mind has to learn to control the emotional mind. That is the important thing. And that is what we learn in the teachings of the Buddha. What we call meditation is learning to gain control over the emotional mind. To start working according to the thinking mind and not according to the emotional mind.
So Bhante was talking about the emotional mind is the one that is disturbing us, and we have not been using thinking mind very wisely. Later on in the next question, I'm going to explain about why the emotional mind is always controlling the thinking mind. There is a scientific explanation, so hang on for that, because it's very important to realize the reason why emotions are always controlling the thinking. There is a powerful scientific explanation I will come to in a moment. So now the Buddha used 3 words to describe the mind. The first word he used is vijnana. Vijnana is referring to this process of perception arising because of the panchakanda, the 5 aggregates. So this is really the process of perception, producing a mental image because our sense organs picked up stimulations from the environment. So light enters the eye, sound enters the ear, right? And aroma enters the nose, and flavors come into contact with the tongue, and tangible objects come into contact with the body. We experience that, and then there's a mental image arising. All this is bringing our mind to the awareness or the perception of objects in the environment. That is called vijnana. And therefore, vijnana is often translated as consciousness. Well, in terms of the sense organ, it is not consciousness, it is just perception. But consciousness is the correct word to use in terms of the sixth sense, the mind. We have 5 physical senses plus the mind, the sixth sense. And that sixth sense is the consciousness. The second word the Buddha used to describe the mind is Mano. Mano is referring to what the psychologists would call the cognitive process, or the plain simple English word would be thinking, right? The cognizing, cognition, thinking. And it leads to cognition and conception. That means when we experience the environment through the perception, we become aware of an object, then we begin to react to, we begin to feel the object, and we begin to interpret what that object is. And the first thing that does is that we assign a name, a label to call that object. So if I were to show you this, straight away, you know this is a mouse, even though you have not seen this mouse before. All of you have not seen this mouse before. But the moment you see this, you know straight away this is a computer mouse. Because your mind has categorized, grouped them in the mind. That's why it's called categorized identification. That all the mouse look similar, so you group them. The moment you see something like that, you straight away interpret it and call it a mouse. Calling it a mouse, the word mouse, that is the nama. Having the image of this mouse, when your eyes see it, that is the rupa. And this process of interpretation is papancha. And with this, we begin to cognize what we have seen. And we create concepts. So cognizing the experience, this is called the Dhamma. The word Dhamma here is used to refer to the experience of seeing, cognizing. Actually, the word Dhamma in Pali has many meanings, but the most important meaning is it is referring to experience. And in fact, that's what the Buddha was teaching. The Buddha came to earth and taught the whole world his experience. He was not bringing the truth from somewhere else, like some other religions say that God spoke the truth. No, the Buddha did not bring the truth from heaven or from anywhere else. The Buddha was teaching us his experience. That's why that is called the Dhamma also. So in other words, we begin to cognize that experience and create concepts. Concepts means story. Right? So when you see this, you begin to think, oh, it's a blue mouse. I like blue mouse. So thinking that it's a blue mouse, you like blue mouse, that is a concept. So we create two things, concept and choices. The moment you see this, you think of it, oh, I like blue mouse. Then you have a choice. Oh, this is so cute. Maybe tomorrow I will go out and buy a blue mouse. Then you're creating a choice. So the mind is creating concepts and choices. Right? So this is really the activity of the cognitive process, what we normally call the thinking mind. Cognition and conception. But the Buddha also used a third word to describe the mind. He called it chitta. Chitta, the psychologists refer to it as affective process, or the common layman's term would be emotions. We think of it in terms of emotions. But really what is happening is that it leads to mood and temperament. Mood is how you feel about it. So in other words, when you experience something and you give it a name and you create the concept, you begin to feel. And this feeling is Vedana. If it is something pleasant, you feel good about it. If it is something unpleasant, you don't like it, you feel bad about it. So this feeling leads to a mood, right? And then you begin to want to react. You have the urge to react, the urge to react, wanting to react. That's your temperament. And that reaction is called Tanha. Tanha is really your emotional reaction to how you feel about what you have experienced. But unfortunately, many people translate Tanha as craving. It's really not so much craving, but it is your reaction, the urge to react, the thirst to react. Tanha is sometimes translated with the notion that it is a thirst. Well, that is not the thirst for wanting something. That is the thirst for reacting to something. Because if it is unpleasant, why would you want it? So you react to it. If it is unpleasant, you want to push it away. That is your thirst to push it away. Your tanha is your emotional reaction to the feeling of what you have experienced. And it leads to your mood. Mood means how you feel about it. Oh, you like it, you feel good. If it is unpleasant, you don't like it, you feel bad. Temperament is this urge to react. And that's why when people react badly, we call them, oh, you're having a temper. You know, this is your temper. You're reacting badly. This is what it is all about. But not only that, the chitta also personalizes every experience. Now, this word upadana means personalizing. But of course, it is commonly translated as clinging, grasping, attaching. But a more precise meaning, this is one of the most beautiful things that Bhante Punnaji has taught us, and he uses very precise meaning. So the very precise meaning of the word upadana is personalizing. When we experience something, as I told you before, the mind breaks that experience into object and subject, and because of that, we begin to personalize, you know, that experience. If it is something pleasant, then we say, I like it. If it is something unpleasant, I don't like it. What's the first word? I, you see, that personalizing it. And this leads to a very self-centered existence. The mind is thinking of existence because it is thinking of subject and object. And that's why the mind is locked on to existence. And this is bhava tanha, right? The reaction to want to exist. So this is really what's going on. The mind personalizes, clings on, grasp, attached to that experience. Right? Before I go further, I just want to explain this word upadana, often translated as grasping. Why did Bhante call it personalizing? Because you have to break that word into the root word. Upadana actually made of two key words, upa and adana. Upa means bringing it inside, or the inside, right? So bringing something inside is called upa. Adana is the opposite of dana. So what is dana? Dana is giving. So when you give, it is dana. In Pali, when you have the a in front of a word, it gives the opposite meaning of that word. So in other words, adana means taking. So when you experience something, you take it, bringing it inside. That's why Bhante calls this personalizing. When you experience something, then you take the whole experience inwards and say, I like it, I don't like it. Common example, you go to the shopping mall and then your neighbor comes along from a distance, you see that neighbor, you recognize him, and then what is the first thought that comes to your mind when you see a neighbor that you recognize? The first thought is, I see my neighbor. That's what it is. So that is the I. Then see the neighbor. Neighbor is the object. I is the subject. So we always break experience down to subject and object. Right? We don't realize that there is only the experience. So that is really why upadana is personalizing the experience. So now let's quickly examine the Four Noble Truths and look at how it is connected to these three terms, especially talking about Mano, the thinking mind, and Citta, the emotional mind. Okay. In the first Noble Truth, the Buddha was referring to 8 conditions of suffering. The first 4 are very straightforward: birth, aging, sickness, and death. These are suffering. Then the Buddha says separation from what is pleasing is suffering. That means we experience something pleasant. Now we have lost it. We no longer have it. That is suffering. Simple example. What is one object you use a lot and you like it a lot, and if you lose that, you're going to get very angry. You're going to get very hurt. It's your cell phone. Everybody has one. What would you do? What happens if you lose your cell phone? Are you happy? Of course not. So separation from what is pleasing, that is suffering. Union with what is displeasing, that means you have an experience that is unpleasant, you don't like it, it hurts you, and then you're stuck with it, then that is suffering. For example, you wake up in the morning and then there is a headache. You feel the headache. So having a headache is displeasing. It is unpleasant. It is not nice. But you're stuck with it. You can't get rid of the headache. You try to take Panadol or take paracetamol or whatever. The headache does not go away. You're stuck with it. Then that is suffering. So in other words, something unpleasant, you can't get rid of it. That is suffering. Then the next one is talking about having a desire, a wish, wanting something, right? Hoping for something. For example, if you're working for an employer, you wish to get a promotion. You wish to get a pay increase, right? Every year you wish that you get a big jump in your salary. You wish that you get a promotion from junior staff to senior staff to supervisor, supervisor to become manager. You wish for those things in your career path. But it didn't happen. Your employer is very nasty, never promote you, never give you much pay rise. So you are really not happy with not getting what you want, not to get what you want. That is suffering, right? But the last one is the mother of all suffering, right? And using Bhante Punnaji's translation, in brief, personalizing the 5 constituents of the process of perception is suffering. This is referring to the 5 aggregates. When we experience these 5 aggregates, we personalize them. And as we personalize them, right, everything we see, we begin to say, I see. And then we begin to think about it and reflect upon it and contemplate it. And then we remember it. What you've seen now goes into your mind. So you have to be very careful. If you keep thinking about stuff that you see and you get enjoyment or thrill out of seeing nice stuff, or you become angry when seeing something unpleasant, it pollutes your mind. This is really causing pollution in the mind. This is the process by which your mind gets polluted. If you personalize, cling on, grasping everything you see, hear, smell, taste, or touch, because it came from the word pancha upadana kanda. Pancha kanda, the 5 aggregates. Upadana is this personalizing, the clinging, the grasping. This is the mother of all suffering, because every time we experience something, we cling on to that experience, whatever we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, and that pollutes your mind. If it is whether it is pleasant or unpleasant, it pollutes your mind. And for example, you tasted a food that is very nice, you enjoyed that food, and you think about it, ooh, this is such a nice plate of food, how I wish I'm going to get it again. Let's say you went for fried noodles or fried rice, most common, every country has it. So you tasted a very nice plate of fried rice and you think about it, oh wow, this plate of fried rice is so tasty. Now if you keep reflecting on that, your mind now begin to yearn for it. Your mind begin to remember it and recall it. Oh, how I wish I can have that fried rice. Now, if your friend invites you to the house and serve you a fried rice that doesn't taste as good, then your mind begins to compare. Oh, this friend's fried rice not as nice as the one I had the other day. All this is suffering, right? So now these are the 8 conditions of suffering. This is the last one, as I pointed out. This is the mother of all suffering. We got to be very careful when we experience something through our senses. Don't grasp onto it. Don't cling on to it. Let it go. You have had a nice plate of fried rice. After it is finished, it's over. Let it go, right? Don't keep recalling it. This has to be understood. The 8 conditions of suffering in the first noble truth has to be understood. Now let's listen to Bhante explain about this mind being polluted. And this pollution of the mind is called asava. Asava comes from a Sanskrit word srava, right? So Bhante will explain that.
Now even the word asava is wrongly translated. The asava means, it starts with the root of that word is sru. is sru. Now sru means a sound that indicates the flowing. Now if water is flowing, we say, oh, it's flowing, suru, 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 suru. That is flowing. You see? So sru is to flow. Now, in the Pali language, we say going is called gacchati. Gacchati is going. Coming is called agacchati. That prefix a is coming. Agacchati means coming. Gacchati means going. So you see, in a similar way, the sru is to flow. Sru is to flow back, coming. So there is a flowing out and the flowing in. So asava really means flowing in from outside, coming in. Asava. But today the commentators, they explain the sru as something flowing out.
Just also, you have just now very clearly explained the word asava, meaning the inflowing of disturbances that influence us. So it's an influence. I just want to highlight there are some books which translate asava as the outflow of reaction, which actually is the opposite of the meaning of asava. Asava is actually the inflow of disturbances that cause us to be influenced by it, right?
That's why I use the word influence.
Yeah, influence. Because of inflow. But some teachers have said that it is an outflow of reaction. And that is not correct, Bhante. Yeah. So the word asava is often mistranslated. In fact, I was at a sutra study class just the last few days. And the word asava was translated by the teacher as outflow, thinking that asava is this outflow of the pollutants, what has contaminated the mind. But actually, the real meaning of asava, as Bhante pointed out, is influence. Srava refers to water flowing. So normally when we talk about water flowing, we're talking about flowing away. We don't talk about the river is flowing towards me. We're talking about the river is flowing towards the ocean, flowing away. So asava, which is the opposite direction, flowing towards us. So this is referring to influences that pollute the mind. That means things that we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch are constantly being grasped onto and polluting the mind if we keep recalling it. We may see something unwholesome, but if we keep thinking about that unwholesome thing, it pollutes the mind, For young men, you see a sexy picture, and then you keep thinking about how sexy that picture is, then your mind gets polluted with sexy thoughts, that kind of thing. So this is how the mind gets polluted, and that's why we need to do something about that. The second noble truth. So why do we experience suffering? And the Buddha pointed out three big reasons, right? And he says, basically the Buddha pointed out, we suffer because of our tanha. Tanha, commonly translated as craving, right? Tanha, which leads to renewed existence, that means rebirth, re-exist, accompanied by delight and lust. So when we're always seeking for pleasures. Now, the real meaning of tanha is really emotional reaction, commonly translated as craving. But tanha is referring to the way we react. And there are three kinds of emotional reaction. The first is tanha for sensual pleasures. And this is really called kama tanha. Kama refers to sensuality, right? So emotional reaction towards pleasant experiences, sensual experiences. The second one is, this is really what is also the behavior part. This is the outflow. The behavior is called lobha, and that is having the lust and greed towards for pleasures. The second type of tanha is tanha for non-existence. That means it is an unpleasant experience. And this is called the vibhava tanha, emotional reaction to unpleasant experiences. If it is something unpleasant, we want to get rid of it, we want to push it away. And this behavior is called dosa, which refers to aversion and hatred towards these pleasures. And the third type of tanha is really tanha for continued existence. And this is called bhava tanha, the emotional reaction to existence. Every time we experience something through our senses, we begin to think, I see this. So we're creating the notion of I exist. There is this notion of a subjective self in here that is experiencing the world out there. That's why this is bhava tanha, clinging on to this notion of existence. And this leads to moha. Moha is the delusion of a self-centered existence. So there you have it, the three types of tanha, the causes of our suffering. Because firstly, if it is something pleasant, we lust and greed for it. If it is something unpleasant, we try to avoid it, or we develop hatred towards it. And whatever that is experienced, we cling on to that experience and we create the delusion of a self-centered existence. And these are the causes of our suffering. The primary root cause of all suffering is tanha, commonly translated as craving, but the real meaning is emotional reaction. So that's really the reason for our suffering, the causes of our suffering. We have to learn to abandon them. So in other words, we train ourselves to let go. When we experience something pleasant, don't think about it, don't grasp onto it, let it go. You had a nice meal, that's it. When it's over, let it be, it's over. Or you experience some suffering, and when you are cured from it, okay, it's over, let it be, don't think about it. Otherwise, you will fall into PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and anxiety, anxiety syndrome. Right? Learn to let it go, to be abandoned. And if you are able to do all that, and that's what the third noble truth is referring to, that you have freed yourself from suffering, that suffering can be brought to an end, nirodha. Nirodha means cessation, the ending, right? And here it is describing what happens when one becomes enlightened. This is really referring to the Arahant. It is the remainderless fading away and cessation of tanha. That means there's no more emotional reaction, right? So tanha, emotional reaction. We learn to give it up. We give up all reactions. We relinquish. We don't want to control it. We let it go, right? So this emotional reaction. Then we become free from it, free from emotional reactions. And when we become free from emotional reactions, we do not depend on it. But unfortunately, people rely on emotional reactions for their happiness. We can be happy without emotional reactions altogether, but people rely on emotional reactions for their happiness. That's why they get reborn over and over again. So here, a person who is able to attain this stage, this is the Arahant, the person who has become enlightened, that he has given up and relinquished all emotional reactions, that he has become totally free from emotional reaction of any kind. Therefore, he is not creating karma. And now he is no longer dependent on any kind of emotional reaction. That is the third noble truth. And basically, the third noble truth is to be realized. We have to realize that we have to help ourselves accomplish this. In other words, this is the goal to be accomplished. The third noble truth is really referring to a goal to be accomplished, to be realized, to manifest in ourselves, right? And then the fourth noble truth is talking about the way leading to the cessation of all suffering. So the Eightfold Way, I always like to present it in this way, in a circular form, because it is a continuous cycle, continuous improvement cycle. We begin with having right view, and that leads us to feel confident in the Dharma, and we become devoted to it. And when you are confident in something and you become devoted to it, now you are a Buddhist devotee. You're devoted to the Buddha Dharma. And then you want to do something about it, and that's the second one, right intentions. And that leads you to motivate yourself, and you have this virya. So this confidence and devotion is saddha. Unfortunately, saddha is often translated as faith, like as though it is blind faith. It is not blind faith. It is the confidence and devotion of the Buddha Dharma. And then you have this motivation to want to do something, the virya, the energetic motivation to want to do something. And when you want to do something, you begin to practice. And so now the yellow part is the intellectual part, right? This is collectively referred to as saddha, the devotion to want to practice the Dharma. When you practice the Dharma, you move on to the blue part. And this practice initially is the practice of sila. And that is cultivating virtuous morality by right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Doing that is what is really the purification of the body. When we say purification of the body, we're talking about the way we behave. So this is really the discipline of behavior. And for a lay devotee, then it is abiding by the 5 precepts. That's the minimum. Of course, there are more. Some people take the 8 precepts. Some people take the 10 precepts. Some people become a monk. They renounce. Then they have a couple of hundreds of precepts to follow. So this is basically abiding by the 5 precepts is the minimum practice that helps us to practice right speech, right action, right livelihood. And when we're able to do that, then we can go on and deepen our practice and start to learn how to meditate. So the next part is the meditation part. The next part is the meditation part, the part in green. This is the purification of the mind by developing insight, developing wisdom, the ability to see through the realities of life. And the ability to see through the realities of life is seeing through what is anicca, and that is impermanence, what is dukkha, and that is suffering, and what is anatta, that there is no self to contend with. And this is by investigation of the cognitive experience. This is the highest level of cultivation, investigation of this cognitive experience. You begin with meditation by calming, relaxing, and composing the body, and then calming the mind. This meditation is called samatha. And then you begin to cultivate insight into the realities, and that is the vipassana meditation. So basically, this is to be cultivated, right? So we have to cultivate this Eightfold Way. This is the practice of the Buddhist. And this is how we can learn to be free from all suffering. All this is really experiential, not existential. And now to the last question. Why is it that our emotional mind, our emotions are controlling our thinking? You ask yourself every time you are challenged with 2 decisions. One is a rational decision, the other one is an emotional decision. Most of the time you go for the emotional one, right? There is a scientific explanation behind that. So let me explain this, right? And therefore, I have to explain this. Bear with me if you are not a person who likes to follow science, but I will use science as the explanation, because this is really what's going on in the brain. You see, when we speak of the mind does not exist. It is the activity of the brain. All these neural networks going on that create this consciousness, that we become aware of the environment. So all these are activity of the brain. Now that the brain has something to do with this. So let's take a look. The brain evolved over millions of years into three main layers. The oldest is the brain stem. This is what we call survival brain. And this is where the nerves are coming in from our sense organs, being brought into the brain to be processed. And therefore, this produces the notion of vijnana, the awareness of objects that are seen, heard, smelled, taste, or touch, sensory perception. The first part of the mind. The second part of the mind is this second middle layer of the brain, which is the limbic system, commonly referred to as the emotional brain. This is what we call the affective process. Citta, or the layman's word is emotion. Right? And then, of course, the outermost layer is the thinking brain. This leads to the cognitive process. Therefore, we are able to think think intelligently. We have intellect, and this is the Mano. Okay, so these are the three parts of experiences that are produced by the activity of the brain and the body. Actually, it's not just only the brain, but the whole body is involved with this. But we are using the brain as the focal point to explain this. So limbic system is this emotional brain. We have to be aware of this. Deep inside the emotional brain, there is a structure called the amygdala. This is very important because the amygdala is the one that senses everything that is going on. Every sense organ picks up some signals, sends it to the brain. It passes through the amygdala first. So the amygdala is the first thing that examines every sensation that is experienced. And therefore, it scans every sensation, sensory perceptions. And it begins to look for threats and dangers and react to it. When the amygdala reacts to it, it produces, it creates a process called fight or flight reaction. This is commonly called stress. And this begins by releasing stress hormones, causing the body to change. All this is to protect the body from harm. The amygdala's purpose is to protect the organism from harm. But unfortunately, the amygdala can be aroused unnecessarily, arousing emotions of fear, panic, anger, and all kinds of negative emotions being aroused. Therefore, the amygdala has a dual role. It can also become a terrorist in your brain. When the amygdala is unnecessarily aroused, it behaves like a terrorist in the brain. It is both your bodyguard and your terrorist, protecting your body from harm, but at the same time disturbing your mind. Okay, but we have outer brain, the learning brain, the cerebral cortex, made of 4 lobes, and it is this frontal lobe that is most important for all these functions here: attention system, long-term memory, logic, critical thinking, and so on. But it is the last 2 lines: decision making, goal setting, planning, judgment, reasoning, rationalizing, all done by that little part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. That little part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex is right behind your eyebrow, actually. And this is responsible for your happiness. If you make good decisions, it will lead to happiness. If you set positive goals, motivating goals, of productive goals, it leads to your happiness. If you're able to plan your actions properly and implement them, it leads to your happiness. If you're able to judge right from wrong, good from bad, it leads to your happiness. If you're able to reason out causes and conditions, doing A leads to B, doing C leads to D, causes and conditions, you realize that, and then you will avoid things that lead to unhappy outcome, and you do only things that lead to happy outcome. It leads to your happiness. Rationalizing, the ability to rationalize your resources. Don't overwork yourself. Learn how to relax at the right time. Learn how to focus and concentrate at another time. It leads to your happiness. Otherwise, you become too stressed, right? So these are the important things that lead to your happiness in the prefrontal cortex. Now, let's take a look at why the emotional brain takes control. Now, first, I want to explain this term. cognitive dissonance, a very common psychological term that refers to the mind being torn between two major decisions. So to keep it simple, I will just refer to being torn between emotions and thinking and reasoning. So feeling and reasoning, pulling in opposite direction. There's a Pali word for this called vicikicca. Unfortunately, the term vicikicca is translated as skeptical doubt. So it's pulling in opposite direction, causing perplexity, causing indecisiveness, causing stress and distress. Stress is the body changes. Distress is the mind getting disturbed, causing confusion, causing mind in turmoil, and that leads to doubt. So vicikicca is not really doubt. It is all these pulling in opposite direction, perplexity, and so on, right? So what you have happening is feeling on one side, right? When you experience something, you have a emotional feeling towards it. But at the same time, you think through it, reasoning on the other side, pulling in the opposite direction. And because of that pulling, you can't decide. But most of the time, the feeling part will win. So there is this tug of war going on, but the feeling part will win. So let me show you what the scientists are saying about this.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, tug!
And when we try to control them, we start a tug of war between our brain's oldest and newest parts. While ancient structures like the amygdala respond to threats by trying to turn our anger or fear on, it's newer structures, such as the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of our brain, that try to turn them off. It's the tug of war between these two systems that gives rise to our emotions. At New York University, neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux has studied how the amygdala and the cortex shape our emotional responses. You know more about the amygdala than anybody alive, and you still can't control yours.
No.
Why?
Now, there's an interesting thing, again, that has to do with the wiring of the brain. This is if we could just look at it here. So this is the human brain inside a skull. And the prefrontal cortex is here in the front, right behind your forehead. And that is the newest part of the brain. This is where we make our decisions. This is where we plan for the future and strategize. The lateral prefrontal cortex has no connectivity with the amygdala. The amygdala has superhighways to talk to the cortex, but the prefrontal cortex has only back roads and side streets to get to the amygdala. And therefore, it is unable to tell the amygdala, cool it.
But why are there no connections?
We're in the process of evolving as we speak, and those connections have not been put in yet. This thing was built to do fancy things cognitively, not necessarily to control our emotions.
So the scientists were saying that the way the thinking brain has evolved, it is evolved to do fancy things, not to control the emotions. And he mentioned very clearly, the emotional brain in the amygdala, the core of this emotional reaction, has very strong connections to the thinking brain. So when the amygdala is aroused, it sends very strong, powerful signals to the thinking brain, disturbing the thinking brain. All kinds of emotional thoughts will sabotage, will affect the thinking brain. At the same time, the thinking brain does not have strong connections going back to the emotional brain. Therefore, the thinking brain is not able, under normal circumstances, to control the emotions. We need to train our mind to think in such a way that we're able to take control of our emotions. That I will leave it to the next sharing because there won't be enough time to talk about that. So when we talk about cognitive dissonance, what is happening is feelings and reasoning pulling in opposite direction. It leads us to experience cognitive dissonance, vicikicca. But because of the emotional brain having strong connections to the thinking brain, sabotaging the thinking brain, we tend to decide according to the emotional feelings. So our decisions is centered around emotionally charged decisions. Now, human beings are very smart. Because we make decisions using our emotions, but we still have the ability to think, we use our thinking to create explanations and clever reasoning excuses to justify why we are reacting in an emotional way. We're very good at that. We're always justifying our emotional reaction. That's why this justification. So therefore, what is happening is we use our emotional brain to make decisions, and we use our thinking brain to defend our emotional decisions. That's what we do. It's called justification. Now, Bhante Punaj has explained about this. First thing is the way to solve this problem, and all this is Buddhist psychotherapy. The way to solve this problem on a short-term basis is changing the interpretations that arouse emotions. So by changing interpretations of something fearful or something threatening to interpretations of something that leads to peace and comfort, we can control the emotions. But this is only a short-term solution. The long-term solution that the Buddha talks about, I explained that. So this short-term solution is really calming the emotion, calming the affective process. The long-term solution that the Buddha offered is that we have to learn to really eradicate this self-centered emotions, right? Completely stop the self-centered emotions through meditation training and so on, right? So this is absolutely stopping the emotional process that is going on. So now let's listen to the last part. Okay, we're almost time. So the last part, a video where Bhante is explaining about this Buddhist psychotherapy, getting rid of emotions.
One message goes to the amygdala and the emotion is aroused, and the other message goes to the brain where the thinking goes on, and then you begin to change the way. And now they are talking about this, so it's very important to understand that the Buddha has gone even beyond this end. If we see the first verse in the Dhammapada, there in the first verse in the Dhammapada, what you get is Mano Pubbangama Dhamma, which is wrongly translated today. There, Mano means the thinking part. I told you there are two things, the thinking part and the emotional part, which is called chitta. Mano Pubbangama means the thinking part comes first, before the emotional part. So it is by changing the thinking part, which is what is called the cognitive part, that the affective can be controlled. So it is the thinking part that is able to control. And that is the real secret discovered in the modern world by the cognitive psychologists. They are using that in what is called cognitive psychotherapy. They are using that principle, but still they are not able to fully control the emotions because they don't know about meditation. And but the Buddha used this method, and that is what we are using in this book. If you read this book, here the Buddha is, I am talking about this, that what is called the 7 steps to awakening, Sapta Bojjhanga. The Sapta Bojjhanga is really using that same principle, and that is how the emotions are completely eliminated. And that elimination of the emotion This is not understood by all the modern meditators who talk about vipassana, bhavana and all that. They are unaware of this. This is why this message that I am talking about is a very important message. That this has to be conveyed to the world. And that is how our friend is now prepared to do these things, that we'll be able to somehow convey this message to the world. That the Buddha, how he eliminated all emotions, lobha, dosa and moha, lust, hate and delusion, completely eradicated. He was able to do this because of this sapta bojjhanga, based on the principle that you get in the first verse in the Dhammapada. And that is very important to understand this, and that is how we are able to get rid of these emotions completely. And so you can learn this meditation and begin to ultimately somehow reach some stage, even if you can't reach that stage in this life, even in a future life you might be able to. The important thing is to learn this properly and practice it.
So Bhante was telling us to learn this properly and practice it. When he said Satta Bojjhanga, he was actually referring to the last part. This is the higher teachings of the Buddha, where that meditation based on Satta Bojjhanga will lead to developing true insights into realities. And this is what other people call vipassana, but they don't follow Satta Bojjhanga. That's why Bhante was actually mentioning that people don't seem to follow Satta Bojjhanga. Satta Bojjhanga is the teaching of the Buddha that helps us develop this wisdom, this insight, right, called Panya. So with that, I end my presentation for this evening. And please download the PowerPoint slides if you came in later. You want to have a copy of all the slides that I've shown on the screen. And also, you can take a look at the method of meditation that Bhante was teaching, starting at level 1. In the next sharing, I will start talking about level 2, level 3. So you start reading level 1, get ready for next week, right? And with that, I end my presentation. Thank you very much for joining us. All right. So we have spent this, by the way, I put my email address there and my Facebook connection in case you have questions. So we have spent this last hour and a half together, and we realized that that there are a lot of people suffering in this world because of coronavirus pandemic. And we have spent this last 1.5 hours and doing this useful sharing of Dharma. We have accumulated good merits. Let us now share these merits with people who around the world who are suffering from the pandemic. Okay, let us decide, put our palms together and recite together. We dedicate the merits we have acquired from sharing the Buddha Dharma to all beings affected by the coronavirus pandemic around the world. May suffering beings be suffering free. May the fear-struck fearless be. May grieving beings shed all grief. May all beings find peace and relief. By the grace of the merits we have acquired, may we never follow the foolish. May we follow only the wise until we attain the highest and most supreme bliss of Nibbana. And we chant this to share the merits. Idang me nyatinang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyatinang hotu, sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyatinang hotu, sukita hontu nyatayo. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you very much. I wish you all well. May you be well, comfortable, peaceful, and happy. Please stay safe and have a good evening. Good night. Thank you.